Hello, everybody. Can't see you, but I know you're there, and I'm really excited to be here and doing this. And I'm going to start off just reading some notes because I had a computer crash this morning, or actually yesterday, and I had to reconfigure my whole setup. So I'm just going to start off some notes, and then I'll be on roll. Okay. Yeah, my name is Peter Coppin, and I direct a lab called the Perceptual Artifacts Lab. But more importantly, I direct a graduate program called the Inclusive Design Graduate Program. Okay. And here I'm going to be talking about some work we're doing, and it'll be focused a lot of what I've been doing as a researcher, but all the students working on it are graduate students in the Inclusive Design program. And so probably about a third of the cohort each year are doing work of this type. Okay, so this is like one type of work going on in the area of inclusive design. And in this part, it's a type of work that uses insights from the science of perception and cognition to solve particular types of inclusive design problems. Okay, all right, and a lot of these are actually sponsored projects, and so we're able to fund about 7 students per year on this work, which is actually quite unusual in the area of design. In North America, there isn't a lot of funding for art and design areas, but this is like an area of design that really intersects with sciences and engineering. Okay. And so let me just talk a little bit about where this type of work fits in, okay, to design more generally, okay? So I'm from OCAD University, that's Ontario College of Art and Design University. This is sort of the major art and design university in Canada. It's in Toronto. So you know, we have traditional departments you'd have at such a university. The 2 major ones being Faculty of Art, Faculty of Design. And within design, you would have environmental design, which is sort of OCAD's version of architecture, graphic design. Okay, you've got industrial design, so those would be more like physical products, although that's really branched out. And so when it comes to information displays, like pictures, diagrams, and text, most of that is done by graphic designers, okay? But the situation is that a lot of that design is visual, it's graphic, okay? And so a lot of these examples that I'm showing are different ways to present information so that someone who's blind can have access to that information, okay? And so for example, a financial chart would normally be visual. How could that be done so it can be accessed through hearing or touching, okay? Another example would be geographic maps, okay? And so it's this category of problem that I'm really going to be focusing on in this presentation, okay? So let me start off by showing an example
the graph of the IBM stock price and
a financial chart is currently made accessible. So let me try that again, okay?
The graph of the IBM stock price and volume indicates that the stock price rose to a peak of $120 in early June, fell to a low of $105 in early July, rose to the maximum price of $133 in September, and fell to the minimum price of $87 in late October. The share volume was relatively constant with larger, transient peaks near the minimum in July and October.
Okay, so what you hopefully heard, if this system worked correctly, was a text description of this visual chart and graph. So the visual chart, you know, it's a rectangle. It's got numbers going vertically to the left, which represent prices, okay? And then it's got various labels to the right, which represent months. And then there's like a green undulating line rising and falling as it goes across. Think of it like a mountain in the background. And then in the foreground, there's like another blue wavy sort of closed shape, right? And so, I mean, there's like, it's sort of an ancient conversation that's been going on throughout various eras. Like, what is the difference between a picture and text? Or you could think of graphics and language. And it's like a big, deep philosophical problem. And I've got some working theories that I've been using here. But to make a long story short, like we can rely on some intuitions here where, well, like the text description, it was pretty much a linear representation, right? Okay. Whereas the visual graphic, it's non-linear. It's like your eyes can saccade to different parts. You can use vision's parallel processing capabilities. It's highly spatial, okay? Also in the text description, it's presenting categories like it's rising and then falling, but in the visual graphic, it's rising, but there's a concrete visually perceived line that shows a lot of specific fluctuations that aren't in the verbal description, okay? And so the more you would use the verbal description to try and communicate those tiny little fluctuations, the more unwieldy that verbal description would become, okay? And so this is sort of the type of problem we're dealing with. And now I'm gonna go into some specific examples that I worked on with my students in the inclusive design program, okay? Okay. So, well, actually one more slide about this. So there are parts of this graphic that are easy to communicate to text. So in this picture, like the top red area, you've got basically the stuff that's already sort of broken into sort of linguistic categories, okay? And so this would be like the labels on the horizontal and vertical axis, okay? The part that's really lost in translation, okay, would be all this shape information at this figure below, okay? And then at this bottom figure would be the parts of the text description that are attempting to communicate what's going on in the shape information, but it's pretty much an approximation. I mean, so for example, like if this were a picture of 3 peaks of varying heights, okay, and I said it's a picture of 3 peaks of varying heights, okay, there's actually an infinite number of pictures that fit that description of 3 peaks of varying heights that could fit there. And depending on what you're trying to communicate, those little changes in elevation of those lines could be critically important. I mean, if this is a map and someone's trying to steer a ship down a river, okay, well then, you know, the shape of the line is critically important, okay? All right, so moving to the next slide. Okay, so so this sort of, the beginning of this work is based on some stuff I did during my PhD, but let me actually provide some context for that. So actually, well, actually maybe talk about this theory first. So you know, I had sort of a long history starting in art, shifting to design, then developing 3D virtual environments for the NASA education program. So really trying to create visual learning materials, and then sort of doing telepresence with a lot of the robotics teams that were affiliated with that work, okay? So it's like, how can you, from Pittsburgh, because that's where I was based at the time, spinning out of Carnegie Mellon, how can you control a rover from, you know, half a world away, okay? Or if it's on Mars or the moon, okay? And through that experience, I realized that there was a gap in what we were doing. And that is that in design and the arts, or electronic media art design, we had a lot of informal heuristics for making design decisions. Like if you have a 2D design professor, you know, wait, just a second, someone's knocking on my door. Sorry, this is, sorry guys, it's my landlord, broken window from some construction. And so anyway, let me get back on track. This pandemic's pretty amazing, huh? Here I am giving a talk, and you never know what'll happen. Okay, so what I really tried to deal with was there wasn't really a scientific approach to making these design decisions. So for example, my colleagues on these engineering teams, you know, if you're a mechanical engineer or a civil engineer and you need to design a bridge, then, you know, there's theories you can use to predict the exact thickness of the metal you might need, and for say a beam over the river, if it's the bridges over a river. And so I wanted something similar for making interface design decisions, okay? And so to make a long story short, what I came up with my advisors, we worked as a team, was this theoretical model, which I'm just gonna highlight a little bit. So we developed a way to distinguish pictures, diagrams, and text in terms of the way relations among objects and objects were pictorially or symbolically represented. Okay, and the shortest way I can explain that is by pictorial information, we mean the light reflected from the page or produced by the screen that directly impinges upon your sensory receptors, okay? All right, and by the symbolic information, we mean the category that you bring to that which you're picking up and that is being perceived. And another way you could think of that could be like bottom up and top down, okay? And one of the things that we found, and one way to explain all of the sort of different views on picture perception, and I will say that this is not, we're not saying that this is the absolute truth for every situation. This is like a provisional working model that has been very effective for the types of design problems that I'll be talking about, is that this bottom-up perception of pictures, okay, it is very good for communicating concrete structures, okay? So if you think of like my favorite example, Chinatown in Toronto, or any other region of a town where lots of cultural linguistic groups are mixing together, you'll see on the food menus that there will be a picture for every food menu item, but then a written description for each language system that interacts with that menu, right? So the intuition there is that one way to explain that how a single picture can be accessed in some way. I'm not saying it has the same meaning. I'm not saying it's processed in the same category, but one way of explaining how it is still useful in the face of these vast cultural linguistic categories, okay, is that they reproduce the same type of optical structures that you get for being in the world. So whether I'm in Japan or growing up in Texas, where I grew up, it's like if you grow up in a world where light reflects from surfaces and edges, and where there's occlusion and it's processed, you'll be able to somehow make use of those perceptual features if they're represented, okay? But then the more abstract categories that you bring to a representation, well, those are harder to picture. Like it's harder to picture concepts like infinity, okay? Number systems emerge in the world's cultures throughout that time. But if you look at sort of the most ancient cave paintings, okay, they have many of the similar properties that you would see in a contemporary picture, right? So I'm happy to answer questions about this, and I didn't want to go too far down a rabbit hole with this thing. So I'm going to move on to the next thing. And then the next contextual thing, just with these images, was to sort of talk about that actually this more scientific part of my career followed something that began in the arts and then shifted over to design, and then became very scientific when I went to the University of Toronto for my PhD, okay? So this slide here shows how I've extended this theory in the inclusive design program, okay? So whereas before I was talking about pictures versus text, or visually perceived graphics versus written language, okay? So now with this figure, I'm looking at it in terms of cross-sensory or multisensory, okay? Okay, cross-sensory, multisensory, slightly different meanings. So by cross-sensory, we mean cross-sensory correspondences. So for example, next to the label site, we have this line drawing of a rising and falling line drawing. And let's say it's like a mountain shape, okay? All right, it's like sort of shapes like a mountain. It could probably represent a few other things, okay? So that's like a visual graphic of this mountain shape, okay? But you could create a cross-sensory correspondence of that through sonification, right? So if you had like a note moving at middle C and then it rose, so it was like ooh, wee, ooh, okay, all right, then there's like a lot of research that showed that a lot of people would associate that rising and falling tone with this visual shape, okay? Now there's obviously individual differences, there's cross-cultural differences. The sort of intuition to go to explain these correspondences is the stuff you get for free in the physical world, okay? So for example, like there's a table in front of me and, you know, I'm banging on the table and feeling the shape. And so there's a visual structure that naturally corresponds to the sonic structure based on the size of the table, the material that the table's made out of. And so one way that I think would be not very controversial to think about these cross-sensory correspondences is it recruits the types of correspondences you get in the physical world for free. Okay, so another one near the touch label is looks like a bent piece of metal, and so this would be like a tactile version of the rising and falling line or the rising and falling notes. And then below that you have gesture. Okay, and so this is so you know the world's different languages have different sign language systems, and so you often have this iconicity. So this type of, it's a semiotic term for those who are into semiotics. Okay, so that's like a type of representation that has some type of resemblance relative to the thing it represents, and these are all in contrast to the written or spoken variations in all those perceptual modes. So on the right there, across from the visual graphic of the mountain shape, we would have written graphics such as text or other writing systems throughout the world. Okay, all right, and then next to the sound label where we had the rising and falling sound shape, we've got language. Okay, all right, so that's the more symbolic, conceptually oriented convention. Okay, all right, that is in contrast to a more iconic type of representation that resembles the thing it represents. So another example could be that I could have a recording of water dripping in my sink, okay? And so, but then I could have a description. So there's a sound of water dripping in the sink, okay? So you've got, and say if that were spoken or in a spoken recording, you've got the more symbolic, okay, version of the auditory variation, what we're talking about, and then the actual dripping sound would be sort of communicating the more concrete version of it. Okay, okay. Same thing with the tactile version. So it's like I could have a description of this bent piece of metal which resembles this mountain shape, or instead of a bent piece of metal, I could have a 3D model of the mountain shape. Okay, and then we have Braille, which is a a completely tactile writing system. Okay, and then in sign language we have more symbolic gestures that are more conventionalized, similar to a spoken language, and then we have gestures with more iconicity, such as the one you're seeing here, which represents mountain shape, I believe. I'm not fluent in sign language, but that's the example I believe I've integrated. Okay, and actually, for all of these, we're going to be able to go more in depth when we get to these specific projects. Okay, all right. Okay, so okay, which I'm doing now. So during my earlier work, we developed this simpler perceptual cognitive model. Then today I'm going to be talking about what has been done in the auditory domain over the last 2 years with my advisees and research assistants. Okay, in the area of cross-sensory geographic mapping through auditory displays and sonification. Okay, then we're going to talk about the use of tactile representation. So this is Utara Godke's major research project, which is our version of a design thesis. Okay, and actually this is a cross-sensory approach because it actually uses audio for the labels, for the more symbolic names of different country and city names. Okay. And then we, believe it or not, got into gesture with Felipe Sarmiento's major research project, okay, which dealt with non-visual, non-aural soccer spectatorship, okay, for the blind, okay, all right, okay. So now let me talk a little bit about some approaches here. So a big approach, which I think you'd see in a lot of graduate programs, but particularly ours, where we really run with this, is the co-constructive knowledge. And so it's like, it is sort of very much ties into our core inclusive design approach, which is it is diverse perspectives that are the engine that drives the co-creation of new knowledge and practices. Okay, so it's like during my PhD, I came in as a very experienced designer, my advisor, Steve Hakama, was a very experienced cognitive scientist, okay? And actually we were almost the same age, but he had 10 years ahead of me in science years. I was pretty much new to the scientific enterprise, okay? At least at that level, okay? And then Brian Cantwell Smith, who is my other advisor, philosopher of information, you know, same thing, where we all brought a different perspective. And so together we were able to produce this perceptual cognitive model that can be used in design. And so the similar thing happens with these advisees, okay? Now, another two items I wanted to mention in terms of approaches, in our program and in the lab, co-design is one of our central methods. And so that's where you design collaboratively with your constituents, with the audience, designing with rather than for, okay? But actually what we've been increasingly using, I call natural labs, okay? And these are situations where instead of directly co-designing, you actually find situations where in culture, in life, people have already begun hacking together. None of them might be sort of professional designers, but people who are sort of piecing together their own solutions. And then actually you spend your energy trying to identify those people and work with them to actually spread it to more people or to optimize it or to figure out how to reproduce it. And so these are natural, and this has been incredibly powerful, okay? And I'll be talking a lot about this, okay? All right, so I hope all is going well. This is like one of the first times I've presented where I can't see the audience, but I trust it's going well, okay? Someone will let me know if something happens. So I'll keep listening, okay? All right, okay, so this here is an example of co-design, okay? So this is a big collaboration we have going on with the Art Gallery of Ontario, which is sort of one of the top 2 major art museums in Canada, which happens to be next door to OCAD, so it's pretty incredible, okay? And so for the past 3 years, we've been running a class where co-design is central to the class. It's called Multisensory Studio Seminar. And we've been focused on creating these cross-sensory translations or interpretations of artworks for the blind, okay? So in the background in this picture, you see this picture of a very famous painting called Jar of Apricots, okay, or at least famous in that context, okay? And it's got like a picture of, you know, some objects, a wine glass, a jar of apricots, okay? Looks like some sliced bread, some other objects on the table, right, okay? And in the foreground, you have Nikki Toe. So she was one of the students. The other collaborator was Grace Mendez. And what they did is they 3D printed a 3D model with shapes that resemble what's depicted in the painting, okay? And also, many of the objects, the black objects, are painted with this tactile paint so that when they touch the object, it it produces the appropriate auditory cue, okay? So for example, when they touch the wine glass, there's a sound of wine pouring into a glass, okay? When they touch the teacup, they hear like tea being stirred in a cup, okay? All right, and so then at the end of each semester, so it begins with co-design, bringing in various constituents from that community. So in this case, blind and low vision community. And I'm going through a co-design process with various materials to sort of co-develop various strategies for representing this. And then at several points in the semester, they come in and check it on the prototypes. In many cases, we've actually had people join the class, okay? And then we also have students from these communities enrolled in the program, which is probably one of the most powerful aspects of the program, okay? And I'll be talking about one of those star students in a moment, okay? And then at the end of the semester, we have the big reveal, that's what we call it, which is an art show at the Art Gallery of Ontario where the public can come in and experience these translations. And then the sort of more robust translations become a permanent part of this multisensory tour, which is an ongoing service provided by the Art Gallery of Ontario to the public. So if you come and you need, for example, non-visual access or some other type of access, then these various translations would be used in that tour. Okay, and then one of my advisees, Annie Levy, sort of did an overview project studying the types of representations produced through this collaboration, and sort of looked at the various strategies from a perceptual cognitive and cognitive semiotic perspective. Okay, so now we're getting to the first example I wanted to show, and this is jointly developed with my advisee Felipe Sarmiento, okay, and sponsored by the NSERC Create Data Analytics and Visualization Program. So for those in the US, that would be like the National Science Foundation of Canada, okay? The National Science and Engineering Research Council, okay? Natural Science and Engineering Research Council, sorry, okay? And so Felipe came to the, immigrated from Colombia, immigrated to Canada from Colombia, and was a passionate soccer player, soccer fan, worked in the sports industry in the soccer area, and really came into the program with a passion for the very many different ways that soccer promoted certain types of inclusivity. Of course, double-edged sword, not always inclusive, but in his case, so when he moved to Canada, he did not know English, but the rules of soccer transcend languages. And so he was able to start playing with other kids in the neighborhood and quickly had a set of friends and then like learned the language that way. And so when he was in the program, taking various courses, he grew concerned about how people who are blind, okay, blind and low vision audiences and people from those communities experience soccer. So the state of the art at that time, or today, unless people are using the technique we're getting ready to talk about, is descriptions of the game through spoken commentary or written commentary, okay? And so let's talk about the problem with this. So this would be another version of a way of describing the problem that I touched on earlier with the financial chart. So in this case, you could have the spoken or written description: player 12 from red team passed the ball diagonally to player 14. The ball was intercepted by player 8 from the blue team, okay? All right. Now, on the right, you've got sort of 9 different diagrams showing all of the various structures that could have happened on the soccer field that correspond to that, okay? And so, like in this research, but it's sort of intuitive, like one of the most important things that you're trying to get as a soccer spectator is like the location of the ball relative to the players. Like that's what the game's all about, okay? So those spatial and topological properties of the game are what was being lost in that translation process from the visual to text or to spoken language, okay? Now, inspired by this idea of natural labs, okay, through social media, Felipe actually found an emergent sign language system in his home country of Colombia, okay? So these were actually 2 famous celebrities, and well, they became celebrities, Jose Richard and I forgot the other guy's name, but I should have had that in the slide. Okay, so anyway, they developed this technique, and the way it works is they have a piece of wood which is shaped like the soccer field, okay, and the translator looks at the game facing the person who needs a translation, and then they move their fingers around in the position of the attacking and defending player. And then the spectator puts their hands onto the translator's hands, and so they're able to feel the positions of the attacking and defending player, okay? So that would be communicating sort of the spatial and topological properties. And if we want to use semiotic terms, we would say this is an iconic correspondence in that the representation resembles the spatial and topological properties of what's happening in the field, okay? Now, there's also a lot of other gestures that are communicating more conceptual categories, okay? So like fouls, okay, those are like an abstract concept, okay? It's applied to the concrete structure that's happening on the field, okay? So, okay, so let me talk a little bit about the evolution of the sign language system. Okay, so here we have a picture of someone blowing. Okay, and so for the whistle blow, okay, to communicate vowels. Okay, so there was a very clear trajectory here where it began at the very beginning as a completely iconic type of representation. So the first, or the earliest known version of this was actually the translator they just basically like imitated a whistle blow. They blew and put their hand in the position of the whistle blow. And then this quickly evolved for obvious reasons. I mean, one big thing is that, you know, you have to remove your hands from the soccer field, the board, to make this gesture, okay? And also, it evolved to communicate conceptual nuance. So what started out as this highly iconic whistle blow became a series of puffs, and each type of puff represented a different type of vowel, okay? All right? Okay, now this type of evolution would be similar to what's actually been observed in sign language evolution, okay? So for example, there are some observations in, for example, in Central America, and I can post a paper later. Also should have had that in the slide, I guess. Okay, but so where there's like a sign language school where they actually did not teach sign language, but within 3 cohorts, a sign language system emerged, and this similar trajectory of going from highly iconic to more symbolic would be the trajectory of evolution, right? Okay, and I guess like the general explanation, at least according to the theories I'm working with, but that are synergistic what's going on in the various fields that intersect with this, is that it's like as the pressure emerges for there to be conceptual nuance, okay, then these different conventions to show that conceptual nuance, categories that concrete structures can fall under emerge, okay? Now here comes the more interesting part, okay? This is the part that emerged for this problem that is not similar to what's been observed, and that was that other parts of the language system evolved to more iconicity, okay? So for example, for the concrete structures, so the relationship between the players and the ball, okay, what you saw was it becoming more about resemblance, so more iconic, okay? As they got the board and as they gained expertise with the gesture system, they became more precise at representing the concrete, spatial, and topological relations that were on the field. Okay. Now, okay. So with that understanding, then Felipe was able to iteratively co-design sort of a set of instructions, an easily reproducible field, so that other people could replicate this technique. Right. Okay. Now, what I want to talk about here. So this would be a great example of how this type of inclusive design research can go. Okay, one way. So you start off with this problem, but instead of, and of course, going to the literature and things like that, like you would in a normal thesis, but in this case, instead of sort of moving straight to co-design, like we did with the art museum examples, Jar of Apricots example, instead, sort of using your energy to find clues in culture where people from that community are already developing their own ideas, and then working with those communities to better understand them, and then develop ways to replicate them, right? Now, the interesting thing, in the background, you can hear some construction, so sorry about that. Hopefully it won't become a problem, but that's what that noise is, okay? Quite distracting. So hopefully you can't hear it, but I can. Okay, but what's interesting about this type of activity is that, you know, the first part sort of resembles what maybe a scientist might do. You know, they go to the field, sort of similar to what an anthropologist might do. Okay, sort of similar to what like a linguist might do. Okay, and actually we reported on it in the Cognitive Semiotic Conference, which was hosted here in Toronto, and the peer-reviewed feedback, none of them designers, is like, this has never been discovered, this is like a great finding. Okay, but the more exciting part, or equally exciting part, I would say, is that this activity of then designing then revealed other insights, okay? So for example, at the end of the game, there was a series of conventions and gestures for the celebration at the end of the game. And Felipe was like, you know, I don't think that's really needed for the system. It didn't seem to be that important. But then as he's co-designing with constituents and testing his design, at the end of the game, people are like, you know, something's missing. I feel like something's missing. There's nothing about the celebration. Then he went back to his data. He reviewed his video because he'd gone there, and he actually used ethnographic techniques, but also semi-structured interviewing, okay, to understand this system as it had been developed in its own environment, and discovered that the celebration was very important. And then he like updated his findings, right? Okay. Okay, so that's moving right along. I want to move on to the next example here, and I really hope you can't hear that. Sounds like a hammer drill or something. It's pounding away. Okay, sorry for this. We're in this pandemic. We're reporting from home. Life goes on. Okay, so this is the cross-sensory globe. So co-designing a 3D audio tactile globe prototype. For blind and low vision users to learn geography. And so this was work with Uttar Godke, my advisee, but also collaborators Steve Mergasky, Lena Yusum, Brandon Biggs, and a scientific advisor, Marta Vnuchko, who's my current postdoc. Also sponsored by NSERC, the NSF of Canada, and also Scotiabank, which is a big banking financial entity up here, okay? And okay, so let me again talk about the target problem, right? Okay, and this actually came from one of the interviews following one of the earlier co-design activities. So at this time, so I had two students who are blind with the rest of the team who are sighted or have other types of disabilities or individual differences. And by the way, inclusive design, the way we conceptualize it, it does not just deal with disability. It includes every facet of diversity that we've encountered. So language, culture, sexual orientation, gender, you name it, okay? But in this example, so we had one participant who was here with us in Toronto because we actually have students from all over the world because we have an online program, but we also have a lot of people in Toronto who physically come to class, okay? And so this one participant was testing clay prototypes that Uttar had developed. And the guy online who was blind, but he had, college, he in a graduate program had taken lots of classes. And he's like, I don't really know what Italy's shaped like, but I know it's shaped like a boot, okay? And then I said, well, it's actually sort of like a Three Musketeers boot. And then everybody started laughing, or at least they started laughing. And by they, I mean the blind and low vision participants. And it's because, the guy online, he had been imagining a different type of boot, okay, the whole time. And what this reveals is sort of another way of describing the problem, right? Saying it's a boot-like shape, that's a great convention. It does actually specify a closer category, but because there's many types of boots that can fall under that category, there's still a lot of ambiguity, and so you need some other type of cross-sensory cue to communicate that shape. Okay, so I'm gonna show an example of what we came up with, and then I'm going to show one of the more exciting parts, which was this outstanding natural laboratory we found, where actually we were able to work directly with the person who created it for a long time. So we're going to be talking about Steve Mergasky's homemade. Steve Mergasky is blind, okay? And this is before he joined the program. He joined the program like 2/3 of the way through this project. He was just a participant. And so I'm going to play this movie real quick, okay? So there's a picture of this globe rotating, and it's got these 3D shapes that remove. They're sort of magnetic, they snap on, sort of like the plug on your Mac laptop if you have one of those. There's also a pulley system that helps on some of them that we were trying out that helps someone orient it back to the place where it goes. So Australia, the person just pulled it off and it sort of pulled out like a badge reel, like if you had keys on your belt with a little extender thing. Okay, so that's an example of the result we came up with, but let me tell you more about the process, okay? So Steve Murgaskey, who is, works in accessibility, he's been a professional, happens to be blind, blind from birth, okay? And, the way he described it, it was when he was taking a Latin American studies class, okay? And where he really felt the need to have better access to geospatial information. And in particular, he really wanted to envision Christopher Columbus's journey, right? Because, he's getting the linguistic spoken part or written part, okay? So it's like they're in these boats, they're on these for a certain period of time, the boats were a certain size, okay? But he really wanted to be able to, as he put it, what he was able to do with the first version he developed was put his finger on the starting and end point and then really get the feeling of that journey relative to the overall size of the Earth. That's like sort of what he was missing, right? Okay, so there's, what he did is he purchased a toy. It's called the IntelliGlobe. It's for kids. It's not a toy designed for accessibility purposes, okay? And, but the feature that it has is it's got a pin, and depending on the setting you have it on, if you put this pin on different parts of the globe, it'll read off the country or city name, okay? All right? And then he got another product from an entity in the US at I think it's National Federation for the Blind, but I'm in Canada, and so I can't remember very well. Armstrong Printing House, tactile overlay. So this was an existing product, but with no labels, okay? So he had like the iconicity through this globe overlay, and he had the symbolic properties, symbolicity, through the toy, the IntelliGlobe. And what he was able to do with his friend was put the two together, and then by placing the pins to the different parts, he would get the symbolic properties, the conceptual categories that have been applied to this geospatial structure, the Earth. And then you had this iconicity. So through the globe, although not enough, the relief was not deep enough. It was very difficult to use, but it was like a starting point and very exciting to us, okay? I mean, I couldn't believe it. And this actually emerged from a co-design. So Steve had found out about the program through the museum project with the Art Gallery of Ontario. He participated in one of our co-design sessions there. And so we stayed in touch with him. And then when Brandon, Lena, and Utara were doing their co-design for non-visual modeling and mapping, that's when Steve told us about this globe. And then we did one of the most compelling semi-structured interviews of like the last 5 years, I think, that I've been involved with, where he really brought us through about the properties and how this thing worked, okay? And so there's an example of it in action, and there's Steve Murgaskey right there. Sort of the top one, it's like the two products put together, and then using the pin to place it on different parts of the globe to read off the country names, okay? All right, so, and then through over a period of 6 months, with Steve and then some other participants joining, including another student, Brandon Biggs, who's also blind and whose project I'll show you at the end, okay, doing with auditory displays. We basically came up with this design response where it has 3D printed continents that snap on with that magnetic attachment technique that you saw in the video, with the pulley system to help you orient it back into the position. And then we use PinFriend 2 audio labeler, which is a standard product to place audio labels over like the different continents and put the city names and country names, okay? All right, okay. Okay, so now we're getting to the last one. So now we have a picture of various constituents standing around a 3D model of a playground. So this is with the Magical Bridge Foundation, California. Brandon Biggs, also blind, and one of my advisees. He now actually works at Smith Kettlewell in San Francisco. That's an eye research institute, working on work that builds upon the work that I'm getting ready to talk about. Okay, so Brandon, this is also sponsored by NSERC, which is our NSF of Canada. Okay, so an audio game inspired auditory map interface. Okay, and also Scotiabank also helped fund that. Okay, now so Brandon joined the program, and we're working in this research area, and Brandon is not only a sort of self-taught, not only does he happen to be blind, and not only is he an entrepreneur, sort of working in access for like helping schools in California make various materials more accessible, okay? But also he's a musician, okay, with like an undergraduate degree in opera. Like I think it's opera and business, okay? And so he loves to make music. He knows all about music, and so like what a perfect person to work on this project. So we began working in this non-visual modeling and mapping project, and he was doing a lot of work with audio, okay, like creating a globe that could be experienced completely through audio. And one of the things that we did, and that Brandon led, he was the brainchild for this, is what we did is we developed a taxonomy of audio cues from another compelling natural lab. So this is the world of audio games, okay? So there's a whole gaming community completely through audio, okay? With every version of the types of games you would get for the visual world, okay? So first-person shooters, side-scroller, like the equivalent of Donkey Kong, or games like World of Warcraft, where you sort of have an overhead view, okay? And so we were able to study these and similar to Felipe, report on them in academic communities, in this case, the cognitive semiotics community at the time, because we were hosting that conference, co-hosting that conference here, okay? And then at some point, we came in touch with the Magical Bridge Foundation, and what he did is he developed a version of augmented reality, building on a project from Smith Kettlewell, okay, called iView. I'll also post that later. And so the way that worked is you had a stylus, and you would put it to different parts of the playground, and it would provide the appropriate audio cue. And so what I'm going to do is show a movie that does the best job I can through this presentation of showing how this worked. Okay, so I'm going to hit play. Okay.
First person view.
Long ramp. Ava's bridge.
So what you see,
ground carousel.
what you see is a little icon
25,
moving
18.
across the map,
Disc spinner.
and those labels
Playground walkway.
are when you get to some
Net spinner.
feature. Okay?
Laser harp is very far off, ahead and to the right. The
And-
nearest point is at 2846.
Now what you can't hear, because it requires stereo, and
Laser harp.
Grid view. Playground walkway 20.
Okay, so let me verbally describe some important features here. So what's really compelling about this interface is the binaural audio, okay, going on. So if you're wearing stereo headphones, if you hear like a cue, like kids playing on the playground, and if it's to, say, the Northwest, it sounds like it's from the Northwest, and if it's far away to the Northwest, it sounds like it's far away, okay? All right, and then if there's something else, like kids going down a slide, which corresponds to a slide, and it's like dead east, okay, then it sounds like it's dead east, and if it's really close, it sounds like it's really close, and if it's far away, it sounds like it's far away. And actually, to my right, there's a big scaffolding going down, and so if you hear a bunch of rumbling, that's what that is, okay? Just so you know. Hopefully you can't hear that. I mean, this whole building's under construction. It's incredible, but maybe it'll be really awesome. I don't know. Okay. All right. So luckily we're almost at the end, by the way. Okay. So, and then the other thing is that when you get to the object, it reads off the audio label, right? So if you bump into a table, oh, okay, it's like you hear a bump and it says table, okay? And so he was able to develop this concept. He used co-design techniques to test it in California with the Magical Bridge Foundation, with their audiences. We had like the RE, like research ethics approval and everything, all these projects did, okay? And as the jackhammering intensifies behind me, I'm gonna shift to the final slide or two, okay? Okay, so what does all this mean? So, you know, we've had this very exciting area, inclusive design, that deals with designing with and for diversity, okay, all types of diversity. We have sort of this research group within that context, which uses the science of perception and cognition, along with sort of design prototyping and co-designing techniques, okay, to develop these ideas. And then we have this idea of these natural labs, okay? So co-design is great. We believe it's effective, but this idea with natural labs is that it removes many of the assumptions that, say, a professional designer might impose on a situation, and it sort of works with communities and constituents to develop something from their perspective, okay? All right, and then just to sort of wrap up, so this would be, I'd say, the first of many more conversations. There's a lot to talk about in terms of inclusive design of an online graduate program, and also very exciting stuff we're doing during the pandemic to actually make inclusive design and distance education more accessible, like using haptic gloves to sort of do haptic VR for the blind and things like that. That we can talk about at a later date. But that's my presentation so far. So I'm available for any discussion or questions at this point.
Great, thank you so much, Peter. We can hear. Can you hear the virtual applause?
I can imagine it, and but what I do hear is the jackhammering in the background. So hopefully, can you hear that?
I have not been able to hear the jackhammering.
Oh, that's great. That's great. But if I look distracted, that's why. Okay. But yeah, I'm doing good. So I hear the virtual applause. Yeah, in my mind.
Thank you so much. It's deafening, the virtual applause.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the presentation. We have a couple of questions beginning to line up here, and so I just wanted to sort of give folks another quick run through. So, you know, if you have questions for Peter, I see folks are starting to do it. You know, please type into the Q&A function down the bottom of Zoom. We're going to use that as a bit of the queue for the questions. And we'd like to bring you in on audio and video. You know, we'll do that one by one. And you don't have to tell us if you don't want to be on video. You could be on audio only. But we'd like to make this as much of a dialogue with Peter.
Yeah, that'd be great. It'd be great for me to see the audience as much as possible. Yeah.
All right.
If that's possible. Yeah.
Yep. So I'm going to hide my video. I'll stay on audio here. I'm going to bring in somebody we all know, Valerie Fletcher, to ask the first question for Peter. So Valerie, you can start your video whenever you're ready.
Thanks, PJ, and thank you, Peter. Peter, I'm curious about your experience to date in a mix of both blind and low vision as you've been doing this work, and whether your strategies are different. We all know that the population of people who are low vision is enormous compared to people who are blind. And I'm curious about whether you've been able to discern the value of some of the practices for people with low vision and what might be different.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So that's actually work we're in the middle of right now, and it's actually going to get more intense. And so we're actually working with the head of research at CNIB, Mahadio Sakai, and probably mispronounced his name, so I apologize in advance to him and anyone else. Mahadio, which for the CNIB, it's the Canadian National Institute for the Blind. Okay, and he actually is blind himself, but actually experienced a progression in his life where he was completely blind, then he had surgery, and And so actually there are lots of differences, many differences, okay? So I would say one way of illustrating the type of difference among the many differences would be sort of, so Rachel Hahn, one of my advisees who will be graduating in like this month, okay, has been working with Ross Macdonald School for the Blind, working with one of their tactile textbooks. So it's like raised line graphics. That's sort of like the leading, like if you're not gonna just use descriptions, but you wanna teach like geography, and if you have the time and money to make a raised line graphic Braille textbook, that's what they use. And there's like a lot of problems with these textbooks. And so one example, so there was this graphic of an umbrella, and just to show the difference. So she's tested it on constituents who were completely blind, okay, and ones who had sort of gone blind midlife, okay, all right. And so, well, first of all, the umbrella was almost completely incomprehensible to both individuals, okay, blind and born like blind from birth, and then partway through life, okay? Then she brought out a 3D version of an umbrella and showed it to both, okay? And with the person who went blind partway through life, they were able to partially make use of the raised line graphic after experiencing a 3D umbrella, okay? All right, because in the conversation, because they could refer back to their prior experiences with pictures, okay? You probably hear that jackhammer now, okay? So then, whereas the other participant, it never made any sense, okay? The graphic remained just as incomprehensible. So I'm just gonna put this on, okay? I can still hear you, okay? There's big jackhammering in the background, okay? So it became partially comprehensible, okay? Oh, excuse me, no, with the person who was completely blind, it never became comprehensible. So this is like an open area. We're trying to understand the nuances, but yeah, it definitely should not be a one-size-fits-all solution. There's going to be a big variation.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
And Peter, well, you could also stop your screen share, and that'll make and that'll take up a bit less real estate.
Okay, wonderful. First of all, thank you everybody for this. It's really interesting. So Peter, I'm a graphic designer interested in semiotics, the senses, accessibility. First, I want to say the jackhammer is it's like perfect for your talk because it's for us to interpret. It's kind of what you're talking about. So I'm interested in the way you speak about semiotics, the space between the concrete and the symbolic. And so much of the user audience understanding of that space depends on culture and context. So what do you need to do to make that perfectly clear up front so that meaning interpretation is understood? And then I imagine this is very extra challenging when you're talking about the senses, smell, taste, touch, etc., because they're so dynamic. That's my question.
No, that's a great question. And I would say this is something we think about all the time. And so you might notice how careful I was when I talk about pictorial properties, and how it seems people can make use of them across cultures. But that doesn't mean that there's the same meaning, right? Okay, so it's like, so you know, you might be a painting of a cone or a bird, okay, and you might be able to recognize it's a 3D shape, there's a cone-shaped beak, okay, but it's very much probably has like a different meaning, like there's a different cultural context for that, right? And so there, it does seem that for concrete structures, it does seem to be a bit more cross-cultural than spoken or written language, because of just the things we get for free from living in a physical world. But of course, the meaning would be very different, right? And so this is a lot to talk about here, but there's actually one finding which I think is really interesting that really gets at the heart of your question, right? So So when we hosted the Cognitive Semiotic Conference, there was Ella, Eve Danziger. So there's this whole area of linguistic relativity, very fascinating area, okay, that really looks at how language changes thought, okay? So it comes out, it's called the Worf-Sapper hypothesis, okay? It's, I'm not a linguist, but because of this question, you know, been dabbling in that area, reading a lot of papers. So she looked at, her area looked at sort of indigenous languages versus, indigenous populations and their languages versus urban, or versus non-indigenous, but also happen to be urban, I will note, okay? And she found that with the indigenous, there was what they called allocentric framing, okay? Or a way of saying like God's eye view looking down, okay? Instead of egocentric, which is relative to yourself, okay? I might be getting it scrambled, but I'm pretty sure I'm remembering it correctly. I think I am, because I was like, this might not be linguistic. It might be urban versus rural, okay? Like my mom grew up on a farm. She actually operates in an allocentric frame when I was a kid. She's like, go to the north of the house, grab the iron. I'm like, geez, just tell, do you mean, you know? Like I just don't think in allocentric terms, right? Now what we found with the few blind participants we've been working with, we actually have a lot, but it's still a small population, like 7, okay? All right, for these intense co-designs that last like 6 months. And so what we found was that, for example, one of the, actually, Steve, who, well, I'll just call them participant, but he gave me permission to use his name. But basically, when we were interviewing him and we were working with him to develop maps and things, we found that he was using an allocentric frame, okay, with pictures, okay, and so as the jackhammering gets worse, let me just say, so pictures pretty much are from a point of perspective, okay, all right, and what we found is that with blind and low vision audiences, particularly completely blind, 3D models are much more effective, okay, and we've discussed this from Mahadio, like he even, now this is his own anecdote, but we're to respond to your point, is that he still talks about how he operates in an allocentric frame, okay, because he was born, and he attributes it to being born blind, okay, so I don't have a complete answer to your question, but this example, I think, really is revealing, because we're still talking about an iconic type of representation, okay? Like a concrete structure, like a mat, or it's of a concrete structure. Yet, you still see this, the role of culture, okay? Perception and culture. And so this finding that, you know, this one sort of expert linguist, anthropologist, like would use to talk about language differences, you're able to see it within sort of English speakers, but differences in perceptual modes, right? Now this is stuff that needs to be followed up on, but it sort of gets at the type of issues, you know, that arise in this work, which I think is at the root of your question.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. I wrote down lots of notes, things to
Okay,
follow up on.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Peter. Thanks so much for this presentation. It's been super interesting and I think really timely during this pandemic. So I'm totally blind, and I think a lot of us have seen a lot of like the visual representations of COVID-19 spreading, and a lot of news sources and health organizations have been using this flattening the curve model to kind of explain why social distancing works and why we need to stay indoors so we stop this spread. But for blind people, we don't have access to that model. So I guess what I'm wondering is what aspects of inclusive design can be used to make it accessible, whether it's audio, tactile, or a combination of both. And if you know of any projects kind of like going on right now to address this kind of like lack of resources.
Muted? Yeah, that's a really good question. So, okay, so there actually is a way to do that, and it's actually not that hard, and it's actually an active area we've worked in and work in, and because you asked this question, I'm realizing this is something that we should work on, okay? And I think the way out, there's lots of different ways to do this, but I think the easiest to produce and most accessible, because it doesn't require additional hardware, would be non-linguistic sonification, okay? So that's like using a rising and falling tone or different sonic cues, right? So for example, it's basically like for that financial chart I start off with, the one way to do that would be rising and falling tones like right? Okay, so like a sharp, like a curve sweeping up really sharply would sound like a note going up really sharply, like you know. Whereas going up more gradually or sloping down, it would be a more gradual frequency change. Okay, and also there's other cross-sensory correspondences with size. Okay, so for example, if you you might have a graphic of crude oil imported to North America for the last 10 years, and you might have different size circles to show that, right? Okay, well, one cross-sensory correspondence with that would be frequency. So if you have a bell that's larger, it resonates at a lower frequency. A bell that's smaller resonates at a higher frequency, okay? So those are some techniques that actually are very straightforward, and actually we actually did a sonification of one of the most complex one of the most famous infographics by Charles Minard. It's of Napoleon's March, which was way more complicated than this. But yeah, non-linguistic sonification, there's like a lot of techniques. It can be done with tools as simple as GarageBand, but also there's other more advanced tools we've used that could do it a lot better. And it can be done with instruments even, okay? Now, more in the research phase, well, of course, there's tactile representations. So it could be a 3D model. I mean, the standard technique would, of course, be like raised line graphic, and that could probably work for something like that, okay? But definitely a mountain type shape. So for, actually, we 3D printed spectral displays for another part of our project, working with U of T on something else. And actually the composer who composed the sonification actually happened to be blind. And the way we represented the spectral display to him was actually through a 3D printed object. That worked extremely well. I mean, there was virtually no learning curve with that. Okay, so now on the more research side, so a member of our team, actually an industrial partner worked with our team, but hosting a lot of our students and comes to the research meeting, Robert Ignacio, and SenseTech Solution is his company, okay, is working with a new product that's like a haptic glove. And it's like got some servo motors. Think of like sort of a marionette puppet type thing that goes down to these loops that go over your fingers. And what it does is it provides force feedback. And so we found that it can simulate touching like a cone or a cube, but this stuff is still pretty expensive for that device, and it needs like a lot of iteration. So I think that non-linguistic sonification would be the way to go. And actually, I'm going to talk to my team about working on that, now that you mention it.
I'm not from Tokyo. It's nearly 2:30 in the midnight. I'm very, very sleepy, but I'm very much impressed with your presentation. Indeed, thank you very much. I got many friends in Toronto University and also OCAD as well. And I'm a friend of the Valerie Fletcher. And I sent what's the text just before, and I asked one question is, in the first slide, in the PowerPoint, you introduced in the relationship with the picture diagram, and text. And this is not a question, but it's just a comment. I have a very much interesting, experience. When I was working in Silicon Valley in California, and I have to drive somewhere, and I asked my friend, and he draw the direction of the drive in a text. Everything is written in a text. And whereas we Japanese, usually such a situation, we draw a map, and it's easy to understand. But it's my question is this a difference of the cultures or something? I don't know exactly, but this is just my comment.
That's a great question. So yeah, all I have are intuitions on that one. Like I have not directly studied that problem, but I mean, so this would be more like some hunches. I do think that there's big differences. Okay, I mean, so you know, the writing system is very different. Okay, and I can't read Japanese, right? But and I'm not a linguist, but you know, it's a different type of, it's got many iconic properties are like in the writing system, right? And like I have talked to a linguist more about the Chinese writing system, okay, which has these logographic properties, okay? Now I know there's big differences between Japanese and Chinese writing system, but I got to work with what I know based on my limited knowledge, right? And you know, I know just a few words in the Chinese writing system. So it's like a person is like this shape or something like that. Okay, all right, okay, and it actually resembles like a person walking. Okay, all right, and so that's like very different than, you know, the Roman alphabet and like we use in North America and in Europe. Okay, and also, anecdotally, I see the prevalence of manga and comics, okay? Like comics are like a mainstream media. And also I'm a big drawer. I love to draw. And the best program that I've found for drawing is a Japanese product, okay? It's a Clip Studio. And it's like, it's obvious to me that I'm pretty sure that the software engineers draw themselves, okay? Whereas like the other products, like the one from another sort of Canadian company and a US company, Major Industries, it's like I can tell that they're just talking to artists, they're thinking about what artists do. And so my intuition is there is a big difference, okay? I think it has to do with the writing system and the culture and all that stuff sort of bundled together. And so I think, like, I'm sure someone's written a paper. Hopefully someone's written a paper about this. I'm definitely going to search for it because I do think that there's something going on there. And your question raises a really exciting area, inclusive design, which I haven't talked about, which is the work we've been doing on inclusive design writing systems. Okay, so at this point, I've now had 2 students working on writing systems. Okay, one focused on the Persian writing system and like the difficulties encountered with like Western computing technology, like there's some compatibility issues, but also he was looking at ways to actually increase the usability of the Persian writing system, okay? Sort of a controversial topic, but he was like not risk averse and boldly pursued that. And then right now, my other advisee, Darian, what she's doing is she's from, well, she's Canadian, but grew up in Amman, Jordan, okay? And looking at the Arabic writing system and looking at the vast sort of miscommunication that happens due to the use of Western font styles with the Arabic writing system, okay? All right, and so for example, and she's also using ideas from linguistic relativity on this work. So if you take something like Helvetica, which to my eyes looks contemporary or futuristic. So if you look at the Starship Enterprise logo, NCC 100, it's like some type of Helvetica type Arial in that font family, okay? But if you apply that to Islamic writing system, Arabic writing system, it actually looks like Kufic. I hope I'm getting this right, which is actually a really ancient system. Okay, it's very angular, and so there's actually a big gap and massive opportunity. Okay, that is foreshadowed by your question, so dealing with writing systems and inclusive design, but also this what you brought up, like even pictures, right? Like this huge diversity, that whole culture relates with pictures. So that's like sort of at least the surface of a response based on my intuitions and hunches. Thank you for the question.
Great presentation. So I'm actually just going to be asking a couple of questions that came in through our Q&A function. So first we have a question from Christinaria, who would like to know, what was the company you mentioned that is working on the haptic glove?
So there's a company that manufactured the glove, which is still, I would say, it's an early prototype. Well, I guess they're selling them, but it takes like many months to get the unit. And then there's Sense Tech Solutions, which is the small company we're partnering with here. And so I can find the name of the company he got it from. Yeah, so that's my best response right now. But the Sense Tech is the company we're working with. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And then we have a question from an anonymous attendee who asks, has any thought been given to adapting the audio experience in the magical bridge scheme to an acoustic VR headset so that the participant could turn his or her head, and be able to change the audio cue just as one would when turning one's head in the real world?
Yeah. Yes, actually, that's a great question. And yeah, we've actually done work like this. We've done work in this area. And the way we did it was there's like Google Cardboard, which is this contraption that you can put an iPhone in. And we use that with headphones to actually try out that concept. And in another project that was not sort of before Brandon joined the program. This is for this sonification of blood flow. It's like this whole other thing we're doing, like auditory displays for turbulent blood flow. Okay, and in that situation, it's like the user, a clinician, like so what you usually get are videos of turbulent blood flow, like in a brain aneurysm, and what we were trying to do was increase the usability through audio. What we found is that putting them in immersively, like they're in like a VR environment with sort of the tornadoes swirling around them, using binaural audio, actually increased the effectiveness. It's still very much in the research phase. And then our hunch was that head rotation could increase it too, because that definitely works with vision, right? Like if someone's eyeballs were locked in one place, it'd be almost impossible to see. So there's like a lot you get from, not just from stereo, but from eye movement and head movement and moving your body. Like J.J. Gibson, one of the pioneers of the word affordance, it's now used in design and ecological psychology, actually pioneered a lot of that work with pilots, okay? So the physical prototype that Brandon did, would be sort of the low-tech workaround for what could one day be in VR. Okay, so we actually think that VR is very, very on the horizon. That could be accessible for people who are blind or blind, low vision communities, and I think that the head movement is definitely something that we've worked with. Okay, there's actually probably easier ways to do it now. Like there's just consumer level products, like just to try and get new glasses during the pandemic, I was trying out online tools. So it's like consumer augmented reality that could sort of estimate the position of my head. And so that could easily be linked up with audio, okay? And with some of the products that our partners working with, it's actually able to sort of infer your whole skeletal structure. And so you can put in gesture and stuff like that. And then we're thinking that the haptic glove can be even simplified, a simpler mechanism. Like maybe you don't need 5 fingers to do like 80% of what needs to be done. So we haven't fully implemented the VR version of this idea, but we've tried out parts of it in other contexts, and we definitely think that it could be possible in the future. And actually, I'm pretty sure Brandon's working on something related right now at Smith Kettlewell, based on my last conversation with him. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for answering. That was very cool to hear. I'd love to find out more about that as well. So the next, we have a couple more anonymous questions.
Okay.
So can this sort of inclusive communication design be applied to a more physical design field? I'm a kitchen and bath designer and currently only use Americans with Disabilities Act guidelines.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that audio labels, okay, so I haven't directly worked in that area yet, but I think that audio labels, I think audio cues, okay? So I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but sort of like analog devices that give off a natural sound, like a whistling teapot, okay? But if you could take that same concept and apply it to other objects like salt and pepper shakers, or some type of distance sensing. So off the top of my head, but I think a good place to start there would be finding good natural labs, right? And perhaps this question's even from someone who's developed their own techniques, right? But I think like working with people with lived experience and doing co-design, also bring in people who sort of work with auditory displays and tactile displays. I think bringing them together and finding those natural labs and just sort of finding the different sort of hacks and innovations people developed all over the world in combination with sort of what we developed for other areas could be helpful. I mean, I think that that there's probably a lot of things that rely on pictures that could be represented better. Like raised line graphics are, I mean, if I had to summarize the leading problem, it would be, and this is still active research, but it seems to us that most of the raised line graphics are developed sort of using like the rules of visual perception, okay? All right, they're adaptations of visual pictures, often produced by sighted people are developing these, okay? But then their experience sort of rules using the rules of haptic perception, right? And these are very different, right? Like pictures have foreshortening, they've got visual occlusion, like something being skewed has meaning, right? It means, oh, that object's being foreshortened in the distance. So but whereas in sort of the haptic world, it's like if you feel a bump or if you feel a rectangle, it probably corresponds to a physical rectangle, right? If you feel a change in texture, it probably corresponds to a change in material, right? And so this is still active research, and I'm working with my postdoc Marta Vanichko and my advisee Rachel Hahn on this work, okay? And is trying to sort of come up with better principles. She's coming up with a sort of decision tree, a guideline to sort of have a more nuanced palette, ranging from 3D to audio, and when text descriptions might work, and when raised line graphic could be okay. So I think that there's many opportunities, to answer your question, I think there's many opportunities to use these ideas, and such as the ones I mentioned about like putting audio cues into objects to sort of identify them spatially, better pictures, but also I think sort of doing an activity where you find those natural labs in the world, and through co-design, sort of bringing together the hacks and innovations people developed and designs they've developed based on their lived experience to sort of extract that information.
Great. We have a couple of quick questions. So one person asks, you mentioned sensory paint. Can you describe how that works and what is a source for that?
Yeah, so this is, I would have to get you the exact product source. I can follow up with that. You're right, and hopefully someone will help me, Peter or someone will help me remember these. Let me just write it down. Yeah, so it's a product, and the way it works, so it's the same concept as multi-touch, okay? Like capacitive sensing. And so the way it works is you would take an object, like you could take like a salt shaker, and then, or you could take like, say, one of the continents in Utah's globe, and you could paint it with this paint, and then you hook it up to like an Arduino or some other microcontroller, and then it can detect when you touch it, okay? So I can get back to you, like maybe after this, there's some way where we can post additional details and references people have asked about. Yeah, so I can't remember, but if you Google tactile capacitive paint, I think you could probably find it.
Sure,
Yeah.
thanks. And we have a log of all the questions that came in, so we can share that with you and then get answers to everybody who registered as well.
Okay.
So what was the name of the drawing package you mentioned? Was it Clip Studio?
Oh, it's called Clip Studio Paint. And I mean, it's just something I use because I draw on the side. I'm trained as an artist and I'm a big time drawer. And I mean, I like it a lot. I mean, it just, look, I haven't researched it, but just as I'm using this as an artist and someone who designs, and I've designed software systems, I am like, they have a lot of stuff in here that like I've been wanting, like for example, to me, the thing I like the most is it's designed for digital, in that like a lot of the tools are like trying to fake, like, so, okay, you do a drawing, it looks like it's drawn in graphite, okay? And like you can do that in Clip Studio, but also you can do a lot of stuff that feels like it's more like sort of like native to the digital medium, okay? Like it's hard to explain, but if you use it, I think it depends on, you had to get over the learning curve. You know, some of the labels are in Japanese for some reason still, okay? Which makes sense, okay? But it's not something I've officially researched, but just as a consumer of the product, it's just an intuition I have that it feels, in response to the earlier question about if there's a cultural difference, it does seem like that there's a different cultural relationship with drawing. And so I had like 4 examples I used, including the intuition based on that one.
All right, thank you. Next up we have Coco, who has a question. So we're gonna let PJ bring them in.
All right, good.
Hello.
Good afternoon, I'm Coco Haynes. Peter, thank you for your presentation. However, I am puzzled by one detail. You mentioned, you were talking about an umbrella. It's a drawing of an umbrella. Drawings are very important. This young lady just mentioned the problem with drawings, and you talked about it just now. And you mentioned about this umbrella that blind people could not, who had always been blind, could not understand the drawing nor the object. And I am puzzled because it's a very simple object. So was it a very bad drawing? Because my other question for you, okay, first it would have been very simple maybe to use just a little, you know, umbrella that people put in drinks. You wouldn't have had to make a model, you know, a cocktail umbrella, and that was a concept. It's available anywhere. But have you ever been aware of a book called Des clés pour bâtir, Keys to Build? It was published by the Musée de la Villette in Paris in the very early 90s. It must have been 1990. And it was a book designed and produced by the science department and by the responsible of the department, who was totally blind. And the drawings were presenting the relationship of height and volume of the monuments of Paris. Like, what is the difference between the Arc de Triomphe or the Eiffel Tower or the Cathedral of Notre Dame? A sense of relationship with the street. So that book was very, very successful. And I don't understand, well, with very good drawings and Braille, and large text as well. So I don't understand if this book, which I have somewhere in my mess, can explain the relationship of the monuments of Paris, of the main ones. You could not express an umbrella.
So, okay, thank you for the question. So yeah, I think I need to clarify something. Okay, so there was no difficulty understanding an actual 3D umbrella. Okay, so that's no difficulty there, right? And so what we found is that 3D models are highly effective. Okay, all right. I'm not familiar with this book, but from what you described of the book, I agree that it would be effective. Okay, like I would say if given the choice to use a 3D model of an umbrella or an actual umbrella, so you talk about using a miniature umbrella, I would predict that it would be much more effective than the raised line graphic. Okay, now to your question, so I'm going to look for this book and I'm happy to hear about it. We've been working with an expert from Selena Carboni. She's an art historian and works at a museum in Italy that has actually been using 3D models as their effort at making paintings accessible for like 20 years, okay? And what they found very much, what? Were you saying something? I can't hear her.
With making painting accessible, I started 30 years ago.
Okay, great. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, great. Yeah. What they've developed very much is supported by what we found with 3D models. Okay, so if you're trying to argue that 3D models are more effective than raised line graphics, absolutely agree with you. That is absolutely correct. And so if this book, which is developed by someone from that community, provides recommendations about how to communicate concrete structures through 3D models, such as the size of monuments in Paris, that would be very consistent with what we're finding, okay? But the point I'm making was the extreme difficulty with raised line graphics of pictures, okay? Now, in answer to your question about, was it a good picture? Well, it depends on what you're using it for, okay? I would say as a visual picture, it's fine, okay? But the rules of the picture did not translate for that audience, okay? All right, now, so I can't hear her, she's muted.
A full shape.
So can you say that again because you were muted?
It shouldn't have been a line graphics. It should have been a full shape.
Yeah, I agree with you. But the problem is that the majority of schools are using raised line graphics, okay? And so what we were doing is testing. So the question was, how effective are these raised line graphics, okay? And the answer is they're not effective, and 3D models are much more effective. However, there is an interesting thing we did discover about, and this is a very small population of blind users we tested this with, right? Okay, like 4. So I'm not speaking in terms of, I'm not making claims about some universal finding, right? This is like ongoing research. But what's interesting is when the blind participant, we had them draw, okay, the umbrella, okay? And what they drew actually aligned with the principles of haptics, right? So they drew the top concave shape. It was minus the occluded part that you would get in almost all drawings of umbrellas. So it was just a C rotated like that. And then it had the hook. That was the drawing, okay? And also we did another study where we had like nested cups, like a cup within a cup, like of different heights and like all this stuff. When he drew that, it was the same thing. So it was as if you just did a cross section, okay? So that that work. So this is ongoing work, but my hunch would be that like I agree with everything I understood that you said about 3D models. Like far superior.
No, I'm talking about appropriate graphics, not only models.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is that the problem with that, you asked, was it a bad drawing? It was if I were to show it to you right now, you'd be like, yeah, that's a good drawing of an umbrella. Oh, it's probably better than most people could draw. I'm saying that okay, so there's like a shadowed area. Shadows aren't in the principles of haptics. Okay, there were one thing he thought it was a fan. Okay, because it was some type of beach umbrella, and the manufacturers had with alternating squares of fabric, I guess, and so they had alternating like sort of textured shaded areas. Then and then where it was white, they just had nothing, right? Well, under the rules of haptics, it's like texture means there's a material, then lack of texture means no material, right? So to him, it was perceived as a fan, okay? So it's like, I guess like what I'm saying is that on a scale of like 1 to 10, he ranked it as 9 in terms of difficulty, okay? Like being really bad, okay? So it's a terrible picture for someone who's blind, okay? But it's a perfectly okay picture for someone who's sighted. I'm just saying that these things don't match because they follow different rules. Does that make sense?
It makes enormous sense, but I say maybe it was a bad picture because it was not appropriate for non-sighted.
Yeah, that's what we discovered.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, we discovered that it was a very bad.
It should have been a line drawing. It should have been a full surface.
Well,
with a plan.
I think, yeah, plan view is much better than perspective, for sure.
Plan and elevation, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
That's all.
Yeah, thank you.
If I could, this is Valerie, if I could just jump in for 1 second. I think Coco made a very important point about referential information. And that book, if people are interested in seeing that book who might be somewhere proximate to our headquarters in Boston, we have that book. So you can take a look at the book. Yes, and I've always loved the referential information, the tactile referential information. But I want to introduce that it is standard fare in museums in France, largely because of the work of Tactile there, that when they are depicting art objects, in sculpture in particular, they use as the standard reference a little tactile, full body tactile, not outlined, but a little figure of a human, because everyone knows the approximate size of the human body. And that becomes a natural point of reference in understanding size, always in relation to the human body. So it's a standard there. It isn't a standard anywhere else, but I think it's rather brilliant. And
it's a practical one.
Totally. It works for very large things, but also small things and things in between. So it's just it's something I think warrants replication globally. So thanks.
Nice seeing you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Great, Peter. I think we have time for another couple of questions. Anupu, might you just perhaps rejoin us and ask some of these anonymous attendee questions, and then we'll bring in Nora?
Sure, sounds good. I'll actually ask the 2 remaining anonymous questions together because they're both about the natural labs concept, and maybe you can answer them both at once. So the first one is, I'm very interested in the natural labs concept. Are there links or resources to learn more about this? Has natural labs approach been used to other fields of design or types of projects or users? And the next one is, are there any examples of using children as natural labs or even co-designing with them? I'm wondering how this project would be different with a group that is still developing language.
Yeah, so I would say that there's a lot of examples of what you could call naturalistic observation. I mean, that's like what anthropologists have been doing for years. And of course, there's design anthropology and design ethnography, where people go and look at these natural settings. So there's sort of resources about that. I would say the twist we put on it is this idea that instead of, as sort of like a next step beyond co-design, is sort of like outsourcing the co-design to culture, and then finding some type of mapping from one domain to another, right? So it's like an ethnographer might ordinarily study, say, a gaming community and report on that, okay? But what we're able to do is sort of take these findings and then map them to this other target problem. So there isn't a single game that we found that actually is of like, that's actually a map of the Earth, but there's lots of maps of fictional realities, and then we can use those cues and then map them back to this target problem to make like a real map, okay? And so I would say, like, we've got examples of where we've used natural labs, and I can post some papers later. I would say if you wanted to search for things that are closely related, it's like naturalistic observations, it's like design ethnography, okay? So these would be like the types of terms to look for. We actually do want to publish like a methods paper soon that really sort of lays out how our approach to natural labs and how it relates to co-design and design ethnography and things like that. Yeah. Oh, in terms of the second part, yeah, we have done some work with kids. There is actually, for the research ethics office, there's a lot of other sort of steps you have to go through. So Steve Mergasky, who's the one who showed, sort of innovated the initial natural labs with the globe example. So he's blind from birth, and his current work is with kids. He's actually focused on these robotics camps for the blind. Like a lot of these, like there's a lot going on with like STEM education and science literacy, but some of the tools like MIT Scratch program is like very popular or not accessible to kids who are blind. And so he's been sort of looking at the various tools that might be effective so that science and technology can be better communicated to that constituent group. But I would say there's still like a lot of work yet to do.
Thank you, Peter. We have one final comment from Nora to share if you have any additional thoughts to add, and then I think Valerie and PJ will wrap up. So the comment is regarding kitchen design. She says, the biggest access challenge right now is the smooth panel interface. No buttons, no haptic reactions, only an unreadable digital screen layout. Appliance manufacturers need to make accessible products. If you have any thoughts to add on that.
Yeah, so yeah, that's a great one. So so that's not something I've directly worked on, but I will now, for sure. And I would think I would begin, well, after doing some thoughts of my own, see what else has been done out there. But there is some related stuff, right? So there is work that we've been playing around with that sort of, there's a company that introduced us to it, but there's other examples in the literature where you can actually create an overlay on, say, a multi-touch surface, okay? And so there's examples. So Steve Landau for the Smithsonian and stuff produced maps where I haven't tested them myself, okay? But he's written some stuff about them. But it's like an overlay that would go over a multi-touch surface, and then when you touch the different objects, it would go through and make use of the multi-touch capacitive surface. Now that probably wouldn't work for these displays, okay? Because I don't think it's multi-touch, although it could be that I wouldn't be surprised if newer ones or fancier ones have things. And so there could be a way to maybe make an overlay. But it seems like, and I haven't done this yet, but it seems like there should be a way to make an overlay, okay, that could fit on or snap on or otherwise interface that could be tactile. I have used devices where they actually reverted back to analog, like it was more like a knob. Even though it was like a digital device, it had a knob, but I think that would help everybody. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've sat there trying to figure out how to punch in a simple thing, and you got to hit, it's like a flat screen, and it doesn't work very well. So it's not something I've worked on, and I'm not familiar with what work's done in that area. I've described some related things that could be used, but I definitely think that totally makes sense as like an enormous problem. And I think that a great way to do this would be, I mean, I could see a whole small business where if they just made, it could be like a Kickstarter type thing where they sort of came up with this solution with several different variations that could be customized and snapped together. But of course, first you'd have to develop the actual solution, how it would interface. And is there a way to interface electronically? Like, I don't know. I do know that during this pandemic, there's 2 devices that require working Bluetooth on my iPhone, because companies are increasingly just replacing, including an interface, by Bluetoothing to your iPhone, right? Like, for example, I brought a VR headset home, and it actually requires me to have functioning Bluetooth on my iPhone, which isn't working, right? Okay, but so maybe, perhaps, if this is a trend, then maybe there could be a way of interfacing with an iPhone, which could have a more accessible interface. So those are just some initial thoughts. It's definitely something I'm going to look into, because I'm definitely curious now. But that's a good problem that you've brought to the surface, and a good question.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Nora, and to everyone who wrote the anonymous questions to us. Thank you for the interactive session. I'll turn it over now to Valerie and PJ to wrap up.
I just want to thank everyone for participating. I want to especially thank Peter, of course, for tolerating the absurdity of having a jackhammer outside of his apartment. And I want to express our deep appreciation to our pal, PJ Moynihan, who allows us to take these leaps of faith, because we have every reason in the world to trust PJ will get us through. So many thanks to all of you and to these two wonderful colleagues. And we hope to see you again. We're going to continue this format for the foreseeable future as we figure out how to live in this new world. And to all indications, it's completely doable. Yeah. So a million thanks. And please.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, and thank you, everyone. And so we'll be coordinating to do another one that we want to focus more on online issues, okay, in the future, hopefully. Online learning, and also other innovations in that area. And thank you for the amazing questions. And there's lots of stuff for me to think about and follow up on.